The classroom was quiet, the hum of the spaceship's engines vibrating softly beneath their feet as the students sat in their seats. Professor Krell, a tall, silver-skinned alien with 4 piercing eyes, stood before his class of young students, humans, a few aliens, and even a robot or two. His reputation as a strict and demanding educator was well known, but it was his intellect and cold precision that earned him admiration from many. Jake, a human student, sat quietly in the back of the room. His blue eyes were downcast, his messy brown hair falling over his forehead. He didn't belong here, at least, not in the eyes of most of his classmates. Earth wasn't known for producing students who could keep up with the advanced civilizations of the galaxy, and Jake was no exception. The coursework had been grueling, the alien sciences and languages more complex than anything he'd ever encountered. Still, he tried his best, though his best often wasn't good enough. Professor Krell held up Jake's exam results in front of the class. The others shifted nervously in their seats. This wasn't the first time Jake had fallen behind in Krell's class, but something about this exam felt different. Krell's 3 extra eyes narrowed as he read the answers on Jake's paper. F. Krell said aloud, his voice cold. Jake, once again, your performance is disappointing. Your inability to grasp the fundamentals of intergalactic mechanics is both embarrassing and a reflection of your planet's failure to progress intellectually. A hush fell over the room. Krell's words stung, sharp as needles. Most of the students had learned to expect this sort of harsh critique from the professor, but for Jake, it felt like another blow to his already fragile confidence. He didn't raise his head. He couldn't. He was used to the humiliation. Krell's 4 eyes glinted as he scanned the paper again, looking for some kind of explanation for the poor marks. But as his gaze traveled across the sheet, something strange caught his attention. It wasn't the typical mess of incorrect answers, but a subtle pattern that seemed out of place. His fingers twitched, flipping through the pages. The answers were wrong in the normal way, but in the middle of the sheet, some answers weren't in the format Krell had taught the class. They weren't just mistakes, they were different. Wait a moment, Krell murmured, his voice more curious than before. The class shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. This wasn't usual. They had all seen Krell analyze hundreds of papers, but something about Jake's exam was making him pause, almost like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Professor Krell tilted his head, adjusting his 3 sets of eyes. Something about the answers was pulling at his analytical mind, but it took him a moment to realize what it was. The answers weren't in the normal intergalactic language. They weren't even in the local dialects. They were written in binary code, the language of machines, the most complex coding system in the galaxy. At first, Krell thought it was a mistake, a random error in the system, but as he decoded a few more answers, the realization hit him like a hammer. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. He looked at Jake, whose head was still low, avoiding the eyes of his classmates. Jake was silent, and yet there was something different about him. Was this some kind of human trick? Could Jake have somehow learned binary code, a system used by only the most advanced species in the galaxy? Krell's mind raced, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt passed through his normally cold demeanor. Could this human, this young, seemingly ordinary student, know something that his highly advanced species didn't? The binary code on the page wasn't something Jake could have just stumbled upon, it was a system that required extraordinary intelligence, possibly far beyond anything Krell had ever imagined for a human. Jake, Krell said slowly, his voice calm but carrying a strange edge. Explain this to me. The room was completely still. Even the other students seemed to hold their breath. Jake slowly raised his head, his eyes meeting Krell's, but not with the fear Krell had expected. There was something else there, something intelligent. I didn't cheat, Professor, Jake said quietly, his voice steady. That's how I took the exam. In binary. Krell stared at Jake, momentarily speechless. His 4 eyes blinked, and he stepped back as if the words had physically struck him. Binary? Jake, a human, had used binary code to take an exam designed for beings of vast intelligence? The implications were staggering. The class erupted in whispers, murmurs of confusion and astonishment. Some students were in awe, while others were clearly skeptical. Krell, for once, was lost for words. Was this a trick? Or was there something deeper at play here, something about Jake that Krell couldn't comprehend? He turned the paper over in his hands, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. This wasn't a human error, this was a deliberate use of a language that only a handful of species in the galaxy could understand. For a moment, the universe seemed to stand still. Krell's mind spun with questions, and though he was a being of logic and reason, something about this defied all of his understanding of humanity. Finally, Krell spoke, his voice low but carrying an unsettling mix of intrigue and skepticism. "You're telling me you understood this exam? You decoded it?" Jake nodded, his expression one of quiet pride, but there was no arrogance in his stance, only the certainty of someone who had spent years hiding this truth. "Yes, Professor. I've always known binary." Krell stood frozen, staring at Jake as the entire class waited, unsure of what to say next. The alien teacher's mind raced, trying to piece together this impossible puzzle. Was this just a fluke, or was Jake, in fact, the key to something far greater? The bell rang, but Krell didn't move. He continued to stare at Jake. And for the first time since his arrival on this planet, Krell wasn't sure of anything anymore. The room slowly emptied, leaving Krell alone with Jake, who still sat quietly at his desk. Krell looked down at the paper in his hand and then back at Jake, who hadn't budged. "I will need to review this," Krell finally said, his voice tight. "You may leave now, Jake." Jake stood, gave a slight nod, and walked out of the classroom, leaving Krell standing there, more confused and curious than ever before. There was something much bigger at play here, something that could change everything he thought he knew about humanity. As Jake's footsteps faded down the hallway, Krell couldn't help but wonder, what if this was just the beginning? Build tension as Professor Krell delves deeper into Jake's background and the mystery of his binary exam. This part will focus on Krell's investigation into how a human could possess such advanced knowledge and the growing curiosity that begins to reshape his perception of humanity. After the class had been dismissed, the room buzzed with chatter, but Professor Krell remained silent, holding Jake's exam paper in his 4 hands, his mind spinning. The binary code was still etched in his mind, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was something extraordinary about Jake. Something he hadn't noticed before. Jake, for his part, quietly gathered his things and left the room, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His classmates gave him sidelong glances, a mixture of awe and disbelief on their faces. But Professor Krell's thoughts were elsewhere. He stood still for a long moment, staring at the paper, trying to unravel the mystery. How had Jake managed to learn binary code? It was a language only known to the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, something humans had known. The silence in the classroom was deafening. Krell stood frozen, staring at Jake, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. How could a human, someone from a planet so far behind in technological development, have written an entire exam in binary code? This was the very code used by the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, and yet here was a young human, sitting in front of him, appearing as ordinary as any other student. Jake, for his part, remained calm. His eyes met Krell's gaze without fear, as if he knew exactly what the professor was thinking. Krell's fingers clenched the exam paper, turning it over and over in his hands, the patterns of the binary answers dancing in his mind. "How?" Krell finally asked, his voice low but sharp. "How did you learn this?" Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the other students, who were still whispering amongst themselves. Their eyes were wide with disbelief, and Jake felt the weight of their stares. The moment had taken a strange turn, one that would change everything. The professor's question hung in the air, and Jake knew he had to answer. He could tell that Krell wasn't just curious anymore, he was searching for an answer, an explanation. Jake wasn't sure if he was ready to give it, but there was no turning back now. "I didn't learn it," Jake said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was born with it." The words hit Krell like a punch to the gut. He stepped back, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession as if trying to make sense of what Jake had just said. "Born with it?" Krell repeated, his voice almost incredulous. "What do you mean, born with it? Humans don't have this kind of capability. You're not genetically advanced enough to." Jake cut him off, his expression hardening. "I'm not like the other humans. My life wasn't like theirs. I wasn't just born on Earth. I was part of an experiment. A government project. I was altered from the moment I was born." Krell stared at him, trying to process the implications of what Jake was saying. This was no ordinary human. This was something entirely different, a hybrid, a product of an experiment that, until now, Krell had never heard of. The class remained silent, each student absorbing the gravity of the conversation unfolding before them. Some of the younger students looked confused, others frightened. But Krell's mind was racing. He had known there was something unusual about Jake. There had always been an air of mystery about the young human, something that didn't quite match up with the rest of the students. But he had never expected this. "Tell me everything," Krell demanded, his voice now serious, almost urgent. "Where did this project come from? Who is behind it?" Jake hesitated for a moment. He seemed to weigh his options, then looked up at Krell, his eyes now filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I don't know all the details," he admitted. "But I know this, my father was part of a secret program, a project run by the Earth government. They wanted to merge alien technology with human DNA. I was one of the first successful subjects." Krell's mind reeled. Alien technology? Human DNA? This was something he had only heard of in the darkest corners of intergalactic rumor, an illegal operation to combine species genetics in an attempt to enhance a civilization's capabilities. Krell's own species had never ventured into such territory, at least not openly. It was considered unethical and dangerous. "How far did this project go?" Krell asked, his voice now strained. Jake's face darkened as he spoke, a painful look crossing his features. "It went far enough to change everything. I can do things that no ordinary human can do. I understand complex languages, I can solve problems that would take years for any human to grasp. And I can access data, systems, on a level that's impossible for anyone else." Krell's mind raced with the possibilities. If Jake was telling the truth, then Earth had something no other species had, the potential for vast, uncharted intelligence. But with this power came great danger. Krell's own people would never tolerate such a breach of galactic law. If they learned about this, the consequences could be catastrophic. Krell took a step back, his eyes flicking to the rest of the students. They had been listening, some of them in awe, others in fear. He turned his gaze back to Jake. "You're telling me that you're the product of a secret experiment," Krell said, his voice quieter now. "And that this ability, this binary code, is part of what makes you different?" Jake nodded. "Yes. But that's not the worst part. I wasn't the only one. There are others. People like me, humans with abilities far beyond what anyone could imagine. And the government kept it all a secret, even from the public. I'm not the only one who was altered. But now they want to find me. They want to take me back for more tests, more experiments. And they'll do the same to the others." The weight of Jake's words sank in. Krell stood motionless, the enormity of the situation slowly dawning on him. If Jake's story was true, the implications were vast. A government experimenting with human-alien hybridization? What could that mean for the future of the galaxy? And what would happen if the other galactic races found out about it? Krell was torn. Part of him wanted to protect Jake, to keep him safe. But another part of him, the part that had spent years studying the vast galaxy and its many species, knew that this was bigger than any one individual. Where are they now? Krell asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake hesitated again. They're watching me. They're always watching. The government has agents everywhere. They won't stop until they find me, and the others. Krell's mind spun with the realization that this was just the beginning. If Jake was right, this experiment could change everything. The very fabric of human society might be altered beyond recognition, and the galaxy might never look at Earth the same way again. I will help you, Krell said, his voice firm. But we need to be careful. This is far more dangerous than you realize. Jake nodded, his expression one of relief mixed with fear. I know. But I don't have a choice. I'm not running anymore. And neither should you. Krell's eyes narrowed. Then we'll need to get to the bottom of this. We need to find out who's behind this project. And we need to make sure it's stopped before it destroys everything. The professor and the student stood facing each other, two beings from vastly different worlds bound together by a secret neither of them could escape. Jake's words hung in the air, a revelation so explosive that it left everyone in the room frozen. There were others like him, humans altered with extraordinary abilities, hidden from the world. And now, the people who had created this secret project were coming for him. But what did that mean for Jake and the rest of humanity? Krell's mind raced. For a brief moment, he forgot about the classroom, forgot about the students, and everything around him blurred into a sharp, focused lens on Jake. This was no longer just an issue of academic failure or human inadequacy. This was something much more dangerous. Jake was the key to a much larger, more dangerous secret, and it was clear now that his very existence had put him in the crosshairs of those who wanted to control him. What do you mean, they want to find you? Krell asked, his voice now firm and serious. The weight of the situation was sinking in. Jake was no longer just a student to him, he was a person on the run, someone who had become a threat to the powers that be. Jake looked around nervously, as if the walls of the classroom were closing in on him. He knew that if Krell didn't understand the full scope of the situation, he wouldn't be able to help him. Jake began, but his voice faltered. They want to use me. They want to control people like me, people who have these abilities. My father warned me, but I never really understood until now. Krell stepped closer, his many eyes narrowing, trying to assess the sincerity in Jake's words. He wasn't used to dealing with emotions, but the urgency in Jake's voice was impossible to ignore. It was clear that Jake wasn't just afraid of what might happen to him, but of the consequences for everyone else as well. They'll come for you, Krell said, his tone grave. And not just you. Anyone like you. If they can find you, they can find the others. Jake nodded grimly. Exactly. And once they have us, they'll be able to control everything. The technology, the systems, our minds. I can't let that happen. For the first time since meeting Jake, Krell felt the weight of his responsibility as a teacher, no longer just to teach the mechanics of the galaxy's civilizations, but to protect this human, and perhaps, others like him. The dilemma now wasn't just about Jake's future, but about the future of the galaxy itself. A human with such abilities was an anomaly, dangerous, powerful, and potentially a game-changer in the intergalactic balance of power. But the more Krell thought about it, the more it became clear that helping Jake wouldn't be easy. In fact, it might be impossible. His own people had strict laws about interference with other species. And there was no way they would tolerate the existence of such a dangerous human. You're right, Krell said, his voice hardening. "They'll come for you. And when they do, they won't stop until they have you, and anyone like you." Jake looked at Krell, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. "Then we have to stop them before they start hunting. I need your help. We need to protect the others like me. You have the knowledge. You can help us, help me." Krell hesitated. He wasn't sure what he was agreeing to. This was bigger than anything he had faced in his career as a professor. But the conviction in Jake's voice was undeniable. Krell had spent his life following the rules, maintaining order. But perhaps, just perhaps, this was the time to break those rules. "Where are they? The others like you?" Krell asked, his mind already working through the possibilities. "How can we protect them?" Jake's expression darkened, his face full of sorrow and regret. "I don't know where they are. They've been hiding, trying to stay off the radar. But if they know that I'm a target, they'll come after me. I'll be the reason they expose all of us." Krell frowned. The task before them was overwhelming. They were already up against forces more powerful than Jake could even imagine. The alien factions, especially those in control of advanced technology, wouldn't simply allow a rogue group of humans to run free. They would hunt them down. And if Krell's people were involved, they would have no mercy. But there was one thing that stood out to Krell, something that made the whole situation feel even more dangerous. The technology that had been used to alter Jake and the others wasn't just some advanced genetic experiment. It was something Krell had seen before in the hands of a few rogue factions in the galaxy, factions that wanted power over entire planets, species, and civilizations. Whoever had created Jake and the others wasn't just looking for control over one individual. They were planning something much bigger. Krell took a deep breath, his voice low but resolute. "We need to leave this planet. If we stay here, they will find us, and we'll never be able to protect anyone. We need to go to a place that's off the grid. Somewhere they can't track us." Jake's heart raced as Krell spoke. Could they really escape? Could they get away from the forces hunting him down? "Where will we go?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. He wasn't sure what was worse, the idea of running or the thought of facing those who were coming for him. "We'll need to find a way to disappear. There are places in the galaxy where even the decision was made." Krell's instincts told him that staying on this planet was no longer an option. The people behind Jake's creation were too dangerous, too resourceful to ignore. If they were after Jake, they would come for him, sooner rather than later. The odds of staying undetected were slim, but if there was any hope of finding the others like him and stopping whatever plot was unfolding, they had to leave now. Jake stood up, his gaze fixed on Krell with a mix of gratitude and trepidation. He hadn't expected to get help, not like this. But the professor's words gave him a small flicker of hope, even though the weight of the situation hung heavy on his shoulders. Time was running out. "Where do we go?" Jake asked, his voice steady but full of uncertainty. The walls of the classroom seemed to close in on him, and it wasn't just the threat of the government finding them, it was the overwhelming sense that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Krell placed a hand on his chin, thinking carefully. "There's a place," he said, his tone calm but serious. "A hidden station in the outer rim, beyond the reach of galactic authorities. It's a sanctuary for those who need to disappear. It's risky, but it's our best chance." Jake nodded, his heart racing. The outer rim was dangerous, lawless and full of criminals, mercenaries, and other unsavory figures, but Krell was right. They didn't have many options left. If they stayed, they would be caught. And if they were caught, there would be no escape. "We leave tonight," Krell continued, his voice firm. "Pack only what's essential. We'll move under the radar, keep a low profile. And most importantly, we have to be careful who we trust." As the students slowly filed out of the classroom, whispers of the conversation spread like wildfire. No one knew exactly what was going on, but there was a palpable tension in the air. The students who had once looked at Jake with curiosity or even disdain now seemed to regard him with a mixture of awe and fear. Some had already begun to suspect that there was more to this than met the eye. But others were still in the dark, unaware of the stakes that were about to change the course of their lives forever. Jake felt the weight of those stares, but he pushed it aside. This wasn't about what others thought of him. This was about survival. The survival of not just him, but of the others like him, those who had been altered, just like he had, and who were now hiding from the same people who had created him. As they left the classroom, Krell's mind was racing. He knew this mission would be fraught with danger. The government's forces would be hunting them from every corner of the galaxy. And even if they managed to find the hidden sanctuary, it wasn't guaranteed to offer protection. The people after Jake were powerful, and they had the resources to track them wherever they went. But there was something more pressing that Krell couldn't shake, the nagging suspicion that Jake wasn't the only one who had been altered. Jake had spoken of a project, of others who had been changed, and of a plan that went beyond just controlling these individuals. Krell couldn't help but wonder, what was the true purpose behind the project? Why had they chosen Jake? Why had they experimented with humans at all? As they made their way to the ship, Krell's old transport that could slip under the radar of any galactic scanners, Jake turned to the professor, his voice low. "You said there were others. Where are they? Can we find them?" Krell paused for a moment, his hand resting on the ship's entrance. He wasn't sure what to say. The truth was, he didn't know where to begin. Jake's father had mentioned other subjects, but he hadn't provided specifics. There was a chance, a slim one, that Jake could reach out to them through the same binary system that had been used to encode his exams. But would they even want to be found? After all, they were all fugitives now, running from an enemy far too powerful to defeat. "I don't know where they are," Krell admitted finally. "But we'll start looking. We'll use everything we have. The binary system, it's the key. We just need to decode it." Jake nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. The thought of finding others like him was both a blessing and a curse. The more people they found, the more danger they would be in. But they couldn't leave them behind, not when there was a chance they could work together to stop whatever this was. The door to the ship slid open with a hiss, and they both stepped inside. Krell went straight to the controls, his hands moving with practiced precision. Jake took a seat in one of the chairs, his mind spinning. His whole life had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours, and now, as the ship lifted off from the ground, he felt the weight of it all. They were leaving everything behind. Friends, family, even their own world. But as Krell set the coordinates for the hidden station in the outer rim, Jake couldn't help but wonder, what were they really running from? The government? Or something much darker that lay behind this whole conspiracy? "We're not just running from them," Jake said, as if voicing his own thoughts aloud. "We're running towards something bigger. I don't know what it is, but we need to find it. We need to find the truth." Krell glanced at him, a rare moment of understanding passing between them. "And we will. But we have to be ready for whatever comes next. There's no turning back now." As the ship soared into the vast emptiness of space, the stars twinkling in the distance like distant beacons, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only just beginning. The real fight, the one that would decide the fate of all the altered humans and perhaps even the galaxy itself, was still ahead. And whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain, it wouldn't be easy. But he wasn't alone. And together, they would face whatever came their way. The ship glided silently through the stars, a mere speck in the vast expanse of space. Inside, the hum of the engines was the only sound, broken only by the occasional crackle of the communications panel. Jake sat in his seat, his eyes scanning the darkened galaxy beyond the window. The endless stretch of space seemed infinite, and yet, he felt trapped. Krell sat beside him, a calculated expression on his face as he monitored the ship's flight path. The ship was small, inconspicuous, and it was their only chance to get to the outer rim undetected. But there was still so much they didn't know, about the government's true intentions, about the other subjects like Jake, and about the mission that had started this whole mess. The binary system. Jake had tried to block out the nagging questions swirling in his mind, but they kept coming back. Why had he been chosen? Why was he different? And what exactly had they altered in him? He needed answers. And Krell, though reluctant to reveal too much, had made it clear, they had to find the others. Do you think we'll find them? Jake asked, his voice breaking the silence. His words hung in the air as he turned to Krell, who was focused on the ship's controls. The others like me, I mean. Can we find them before they do? Krell's fingers paused on the console, and for the first time, he glanced at Jake. There was a strange look in his eyes, almost as if he were weighing a decision. I don't know, Krell admitted. But we have to try. The ones behind this, they're dangerous. And they won't stop until they have you, and anyone else who was part of that project. Jake's chest tightened. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, suffocating him. He wasn't just running from an enemy anymore, he was running from his past. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was something bigger at play, something far darker than a simple government project. We need to figure out what they really want with us, Jake said, his voice firming with resolve. It's not just about control anymore. It's about something else. Something bigger. Krell nodded, his eyes narrowing. You're right. But right now, we have to focus on survival. We need to reach the outer rim first. Once we're there, we can plan our next move. The journey to the outer rim would take hours, long enough for Jake to do some thinking. He felt a burning need to learn more, to understand exactly what had been done to him and the others. But as his thoughts spiraled, his mind kept returning to one central question: what would they do once they found the others? Could they stop the government's plan? Or would they all be hunted down one by one, until there was no one left? As the hours passed, the tension between them grew thicker. Jake couldn't escape the feeling that they were running out of time, that the government was already on their trail. He had no idea how they would track him, or if they even knew that he had escaped yet. But deep down, he knew that the hunt had already begun. And once they found him, there would be no turning back. Later that night, after the soft hum of the engines had lulled them both into a quiet but tense rest, Krell broke the silence. We have to talk, he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Jake looked up, startled by the suddenness of the conversation. What's wrong? He asked, sensing the shift in Krell's tone. Krell took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Jake's. There's something I haven't told you, he said slowly, his words weighed down with hesitation. Something I didn't think I was ready to share. Jake's heart skipped a beat. What is it? Krell paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. The experiment, it wasn't just about creating stronger humans or more intelligent humans. It was about something else. Something far more dangerous. The people who started this project, they weren't just interested in your abilities. They were interested in the technology inside you. Jake frowned. What do you mean? What technology? Krell's eyes darkened. The binary code you use, it's not just some form of communication. It's a conduit. It connects directly to something much larger. A system that spans across galaxies. The project wasn't just about enhancing you or the others, it was about linking human minds to a central network of alien intelligence. You're not just a product of genetic alteration. You're part of a much bigger plan. Jake's stomach dropped. A central network? You're saying they want to use us to control everything? Krell nodded grimly. Yes. If they succeed, they'll have access to all human minds, controlled, linked, and capable of manipulating entire systems. They'll use you, and others like you, to create an empire. An empire that spans beyond just Earth. And the worst part is, this isn't just about Earth anymore. This is about the whole galaxy. Jake stared at him, feeling a cold sweat forming on his skin. He hadn't fully grasped the scope of what was happening, but now, it was all too clear. They weren't just after a few altered humans. They were trying to control an entire species, an entire galaxy. I didn't ask for this, Jake muttered, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. I didn't choose any of this. I know, Krell said softly. But now, you're the key. You're the one who can stop them. You have to. Jake felt a sense of hopelessness creeping in. He didn't want to be the key to stopping a galactic empire. He just wanted a life, freedom from the government that had created him. But that choice had been taken from him long ago. As Krell turned back to the ship's controls, Jake stared out into the void of space. The stars seemed farther away now, as if mocking him. He wasn't just running from the past anymore. He was running from the future. And every step he took brought him closer to a destiny he never asked for. How do we stop them? Jake finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Krell looked at him, his eyes full of determination. We fight. But we need to find the others. You're not alone in this. Together, you can stop them. Jake wasn't sure if he believed that, but as they continued their journey through the stars, one thing was clear, the stakes had just grown higher. And if they didn't act fast, the galaxy as they knew it might be lost forever. Jake's heart raced as Krell's words sank in. His mind struggled to process what he was hearing, but the implications were too terrifying to ignore. The binary code, the experiments, the other altered humans, it was all part of a larger, sinister plan to control not just Earth, but an entire galaxy. The government's reach was no longer confined to one planet. It was about galactic domination. Are you telling me they want to enslave the human race? Jake whispered, the horror in his voice raw and undeniable. Krell's face was etched with solemnity. Yes, but it's worse than that. They're not just looking to control humanity. The technology inside you, it's linked to something more ancient, something that could give them access to vast powers, powers that would make them unstoppable. Jake's mind was spinning, unable to wrap itself around the full scope of the danger. He had thought the worst was behind him, the deception, the escape, but this was something else entirely. His life, and the lives of the other altered humans, had become the key to a galaxy-wide war for power. The stakes were higher than ever. So what do we do? Jake asked, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and resolve. How do we stop them? Krell's eyes met his. We fight. We gather the others like you, the ones who've been altered. We make sure they never connect with the network, never allow it to spread. It's not going to be easy, there will be sacrifices, but we can't let them succeed. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. For the first time, he felt something stir inside him that wasn't fear or confusion, it was determination. He wasn't just running anymore. He was fighting for his life, for the lives of others, and for the future of humanity. The next few days were a blur of planning, tension, and risk. Krell and Jake set their course for the outer rim, trying to stay under the radar as they reached the hidden sanctuary Krell had mentioned. Along the way, Jake began to reflect more on the people who had created him and the others. These scientists and rogue factions didn't care about ethics, about the lives they were destroying. They cared only about power, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to get it. When they finally arrived at the sanctuary, Jake's heart pounded in his chest. It was a remote, uncharted space station, hidden deep in the asteroid belt, far from the reach of any known galactic authorities. It looked like a rundown warehouse in space, old and barely functioning, but it had one thing that made it invaluable: a network of individuals who had been hiding from the system for years. These were people who had been betrayed, lost, and forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. Jake and Krell met with a few of the leaders, a mix of exiled scientists, former soldiers, and defectors from the galactic elite. It wasn't much of a welcome, but there was a shared understanding between them. They all had a common enemy, and they all knew what was at stake. The plan was set into motion. They would infiltrate the research labs of the government factions, the ones that had been tracking altered humans. Jake would use the binary code to access the network and find the others, while Krell and the rest of the group would fight off any attempts to stop them. The time for subtlety was over. If they were going to stop this, they needed to take action. The infiltration didn't go as smoothly as planned. As they entered the heavily guarded facility, they were met with fierce resistance. Armed guards, security drones, and automated defense systems made it clear that this was no ordinary mission. It was a war. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as the first wave of guards stormed toward them. Krell's alien technology proved invaluable, sending pulses of energy that disabled the guards' weapons and disarmed the drones. But it wasn't enough. They had to move quickly, and time was running out. Jake felt a strange calm settle over him as they pushed forward. He had been altered, this much was true, but it wasn't just his physical changes that set him apart. It was the part of him that was different, the binary system in his mind, the power to decode and manipulate information. It was the key to everything. "I'm going in," Jake said to Krell, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I'll access the central hub. You keep them off me." Krell nodded grimly, his many eyes scanning the battlefield. "Be quick. We don't have much time." Jake focused, blocking out the sounds of explosions and gunfire as he connected to the facility's central network. The binary code pulsed in his mind like a rhythm, familiar and yet distant, pulling him toward the answers he so desperately needed. As he accessed deeper levels of the system, images, data, and encrypted files flashed before his eyes. There was no doubt about it, the project had gone far beyond what he had ever imagined. And the true scale of it was terrifying. He found the names of other altered humans, scattered across the galaxy, each one marked for capture. He found files detailing the process, and the horrific consequences of those who resisted the experiment. But there was something else, a hidden message, buried beneath layers of security. It was a warning. The central system was more than just a power source for the galaxy's elite, it was a weapon. A weapon capable of rewriting reality itself. And the people who had created the experiment had planned to use it to reshape the universe, bending it to their will. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The binary code was more than just a communication tool. It was a doorway to ultimate power, power that could change everything. As Jake disconnected from the network, he felt the weight of the revelation press down on him. He had learned what he needed to know, but now, he was faced with a hard truth: this fight wasn't just about stopping a rogue faction. It was about preventing an entire new order of existence. And that was a war that would require more than just him, more than just Krell. As the dust settled and the last of the guards were defeated, Jake and Krell made their way back to the ship. The mission had been a success, but it was only the beginning. The information they had gathered was crucial, but the real fight was still ahead. Jake looked at Krell, his eyes determined. "We've got a long road ahead. But we're not alone in this fight. There are more of us out there, and we're going to find them." Krell gave him a nod of approval, his expression one of quiet pride. "We're not alone. And now, we've got the knowledge to make sure they never succeed." As the ship lifted off into the endless expanse of space, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope that they could still change the galaxy. Hope that humanity, with all its flaws and strength, could fight back against the darkness that threatened to consume it. And as they sped toward their next mission, Jake knew one thing for sure: this was far from over.